On my husband's birthday, his mother deliberately tried to humiliate me, without realizing the shock I had planned for her. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's get into it. I had spent the entire morning in the kitchen, carefully preparing Cade's favorite dishes, making sure every detail was perfect. I wanted this night to be special, not just for him but to show Verla that I could manage a home with grace, despite her constant insinuations that I wasn't up to the standard. Of course, Verla had a way of making everything about her. The second she walked in, she scanned the room with that familiar smirk, eyeing the decorations and the food as if she were a judge in some reality show. "Is this all you've prepared?" she asked, her tone light but loaded with judgment. I remember when Cade's last girlfriend could at least make a roast without it looking like, well, this. I forced a polite smile, keeping my hands steady as I carried the salad to the table. Cade, sitting quietly, avoided meeting her eyes. I could see the tension in his jaw, but I refused to let her ruin the evening. I had learned over time that patience and strategy were far more satisfying than snapping back in anger. Dinner began and Verla found every opportunity to point out what I had done wrong. The way the candles were arranged, the salad dressing on the side instead of on the plate. Guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent of tension, but I remained composed, listening without reacting. Inside though, my mind was racing. I knew her pride would be her downfall. Verla thrived on control, on being admired for her perfect home and family. I had quietly started preparing my little surprises, small, harmless-seeming things that would expose her pretensions without a single raised voice from me. Every insult she threw was another opportunity. Every judgmental glance, another step closer to my silent victory. Cade finally seemed to notice my calm, my composure, and the way Verla's manipulations had no effect on me. By the end of the evening, I knew the seed of change had been planted. The night hadn't been about her triumph, and it never would be. Tonight I had already started winning, quietly, strategically, and the real surprise for Verla was yet to come. Ever since Cade and I married, Verla had a way of slipping criticisms into everyday conversations, almost invisible unless you paid close attention. She would comment on my choices subtly, "Oh, that dress is interesting," or ask casual questions about my upbringing that left me second-guessing my own history. It wasn't outright cruelty, but the precision of her words chipped away at my confidence over time. She thrived on making me feel like I didn't belong, always hovering near the line of politeness so that anyone else would think I was overreacting. That evening, though, she seemed bolder, emboldened by her audience. A few close family friends lingered after Cade opened his gifts, and Verla seized the moment. "You're sweet, Nell, but sometimes I worry Cade's patience might be stretched too thin," she said, her smile sharp. "It's a lot for someone less experienced to handle a household properly." Laughter trickled around the table, light but knowing, as if she had planted the idea that I was incapable. I felt a flash of heat, a familiar anger rising, but I reminded myself to remain still, to let her arrogance fuel my plan rather than derail it. Every word she spoke, every calculated glance she cast, became a puzzle piece in my strategy. I noted her pride, her vanity, the way she assumed control over the room, and I recognized that this same hubris could be my advantage. Cade's eyes briefly met mine across the table, tension flickering there, but he didn't intervene. That was fine. I didn't need protection, I needed leverage. Verla had underestimated me for years, believing her subtle manipulations would keep me in my place. Tonight I realized the tables could be turned. My calm exterior concealed a mind racing with plans, small precise moves that would expose her for the person she truly was, not the perfect matriarch she pretended to be. The seed of my quiet revenge took root that night, nurtured by every slight and every whispered judgment. Verla believed she was triumphant, yet she had unwittingly laid the groundwork for her own unraveling. For the first time I felt the thrill of control, not through confrontation but through patience, observation, and a promise that her carefully curated image would soon crack. I started thinking carefully about how to respond without creating a scene. Verla had always been obsessed with appearances. Her perfectly arranged china, the heirlooms she displayed like trophies, the sense that her home was flawless. That pride made her predictable, and predictability was my advantage. I realized I could use her obsession against her, turning her confidence into vulnerability without anyone suspecting a thing. Over the next few days I moved quietly, observing every detail of her routines and preferences. I noted which items she prized the most, the arrangements she considered untouchable, and even the small ways she would react if something was slightly off. Then I began my subtle work. Nothing overt, just tiny shifts here and there. A vase slightly tilted, a photo frame repositioned, minor mishaps that would look like ordinary accidents. Everything was calculated so that the blame would never fall on me, yet the effect would unsettle her. Cade noticed my attention to detail, offering quiet nods of approval as I adjusted the table settings, checked the lighting, and ensured the flow of the evening would remain smooth despite Verla's presence. He didn't know the half of it, but I could see a hint of pride in his eyes, recognizing the calm control I maintained even under pressure. As the day approached, I felt a thrill of anticipation. Every minor adjustment, every accident I planted, was part of a larger design. A chain reaction that would quietly expose Verla's obsession and fragility. I smiled to myself thinking about the look on her face when the first signs of disruption appeared, all while I appeared composed and gracious. It was satisfying to plan a response that didn't rely on confrontation. Instead, I relied on patience, observation, and understanding exactly what made her feel superior. By the time the birthday gathering began, my quiet manipulations would already be in place, and I would be ready to watch as Verla's carefully maintained image began to wobble, all without losing my composure or inviting suspicion. For the first time I felt completely in control. Verla had underestimated my awareness, and I intended to turn that underestimation into the perfect setup for her eventual embarrassment. The moment we all sat down, the atmosphere thickened. Verla's eyes roamed the table, landing on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Every word she spoke carried a hint of judgment. Remarks about my outfit, offhand questions about whether Cade's career decisions were wise, little digs that made my stomach tighten. She even managed to accidentally tip her wine glass toward me, catching me off guard but not spilling a drop. The gesture, so small and deliberate, spoke volumes about her desire to unsettle me. I kept my expression neutral, responding with polite gestures and minimal words. Inside, I catalogued each slight, mentally noting the precise timing and impact. Cade seemed to sense my restraint, his gaze flicking toward Verla with quiet disapproval, subtle enough that she wouldn't accuse him of favoritism, but noticeable enough to unsettle her. Guests began to shift in their seats, a quiet awareness settling among them. The tension was palpable, though nothing was said outright. Whispers of unease floated around as if the room itself had recognized the imbalance. I maintained composure, setting the table, passing dishes, and engaging in light conversation, allowing the awkwardness to sit squarely on Verla's shoulders. Each time she spoke, I responded with calm acknowledgement, never raising my voice, never giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. Cade's subtle support became more evident. He chimed in occasionally to validate my points or redirect questions without confrontation. I noticed the small signs of frustration in Verla. A tightening of her lips, the brief narrowing of her eyes, the slight tremor in her otherwise practiced smile. By the end of the main course, the power in the room had shifted imperceptibly but unmistakably. Verla's dominance, built over years of subtle control, was faltering in front of attentive witnesses. My restraint and careful management of the evening had begun to tip the scales. For the first time, the tension that usually weighed on me had become an instrument. Every quiet reaction, every small acknowledgement of her behavior was pushing the narrative in my favor. As the plates cleared and conversation moved forward, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The night was unfolding exactly as I had envisioned. Verla's veneer of superiority was cracking under the weight of her own arrogance, and I remained poised, the orchestrator of a subtle but unmistakable shift in control. Once dinner plates were cleared and the chatter had softened, I saw the perfect opening. I reached casually for the small box Verla had given Cade, letting my fingers brush the surface before pretending to frown. "Cade, I can't seem to find this anywhere," I said lightly, lifting my hands in mild confusion. Verla's reaction was immediate. Her composure cracked as her eyes widened, a flush rising in her cheeks. "What do you mean it's gone? It was right here." "Who moved it?" she demanded, voice rising slightly. She began rifling through the surrounding area, checking chairs, the sideboard, and even Cade's plate as if someone might have snatched it. Guests turned to watch, curiosity flickering in their expressions. Murmurs filled the room as Verla's panic grew. She pointed fingers at different people, her frustration mounting with each unsuccessful search. "Did you take it, Nell? Or was it Cade?" she asked sharply, her tone sharp and accusatory. I stayed calm, letting my casual demeanor contrast with her flustered state. My lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, giving nothing away. I could feel the satisfaction bubbling quietly beneath the surface. This was exactly as planned. The gift was safely hidden in a drawer I had prepared earlier, untouched, yet her frantic search was creating a spectacle. Cade finally interjected, his voice steady but firm. "Mom, maybe it's not missing. Let's not accuse anyone without checking properly." His eyes met mine briefly, a small nod of recognition passing between us. It was subtle, but the shift was significant. Verla's authority, which had long gone unquestioned, was beginning to falter in front of witnesses. The tension in the room was almost tangible. Verla's proud facade crumbled as she continued her search, her carefully maintained image unraveling while I remained composed. Guests exchanged glances, some suppressing smiles, as the woman who had always held control now struggled to maintain it. In that moment I realized how powerful quiet, calculated moves could be. One simple action, seemingly innocent, had destabilized her, exposing her vanity and panic. The first step in my plan was complete, and the consequences were unfolding exactly as I had envisioned, public, undeniable, and entirely hers to endure. As the evening wore on, I began weaving in small, careful observations, almost casually, into conversation. "That's interesting, Verla," I said, tilting my head slightly. "I could have sworn you mentioned last week that Cade's grandmother had given that vase to your sister, not you. Did I misremember?" My tone was soft, curious, entirely polite, but the effect was immediate. Verla's smile tightened and a flicker of irritation crossed her face. She hesitated, fumbling for an explanation, her words stumbling as she tried to reconcile the inconsistency. The slightest slip from her lips revealed a contradiction, and the careful image she had cultivated for decades began to falter. I maintained my calm, nodding and offering gentle interjections that made her feel compelled to respond, yet every answer exposed another tiny flaw. Around the table I noticed subtle shifts. Guests exchanged glances, leaning in slightly, whispering under their breath as the tension grew. Her authority, which had always seemed untouchable, now wavered as those present began piecing together the pattern of her behavior. I allowed these moments to linger, letting the discomfort fill the space without my having to raise my voice or overtly challenge her. Verla's defensive posture grew more obvious. Her hands clutched nervously at her napkin, her back straightening as if to compensate for the cracks appearing in her composure. Every attempt she made to redirect the conversation or assert control only highlighted her contradictions further. I smiled faintly, polite and unthreatening, knowing that my serenity made her agitation appear even more pronounced. It was satisfying to watch her unravel without confrontation. Each minor inconsistency, each gentle correction I offered, chipped away at the image she had so carefully crafted. The room subtly shifted, the social balance tilting in a way that left her isolated yet unable to lash out without further exposing herself. By the time the evening had progressed, it was clear to everyone that Verla's meticulously maintained facade was fragile. I remained composed, letting her self-destruction happen naturally, while preserving my own dignity. Patience and subtle strategy were doing their work. Verla's true character was emerging quietly, before the eyes of those who had once admired her perfection. By the time the conversation moved to Cade's career and recent projects, I noticed a change in him. His tone was firmer than usual, calm but unmistakably protective. When Verla began a pointed comment about his decisions, he interrupted gently but with authority. "Mom, I appreciate your input, but Nell's approach works for us. She knows what she's doing." The way he said it was subtle. No anger, no confrontation, but it carried weight. Guests paused, sensing a shift in dynamics, a small but undeniable challenge to Verla's long-standing control. I caught Cade's eye across the table and a slight nod conveyed reassurance. He finally seemed fully aware of how overbearing she had been, and he was choosing to take my side. Verla faltered for a fraction of a second, her expression tightening as she tried to regain composure. Every polite correction Cade offered chipped away at her dominance, creating micro-moments where she could no longer assert the same influence without exposing herself further. I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the hesitation in her tone when she tried to reclaim authority. A quiet satisfaction settled over me. Cade's recognition validated what I had endured for years, and his subtle support amplified the effects of the careful groundwork I had laid. I realized that my calm patience combined with his newfound allyship was beginning to rewrite the room's social balance. Verla's proud demeanor, which had gone largely unchallenged in family interactions, was now visibly cracked. Guests who had once been charmed by her precision were beginning to sense the unevenness in her behavior. Each time Cade gently interjected, he reinforced the shift, signaling that her toxicity would no longer go unchecked. For the first time I felt the tension transform into momentum. The evening was tilting in our favor, not through loud confrontation or drama, but through observation, timing, and subtle reinforcement. I allowed myself a quiet confidence, knowing the cumulative effects of patience and strategy were working. Verla's carefully maintained control was slipping, and the foundation I had laid was now fully supporting a reversal of power. In that moment I understood that revenge didn't always require aggression. It could unfold quietly, methodically, and still achieve undeniable impact. The night had begun to belong to us, and the unraveling of Verla's dominance was only beginning. After dessert was cleared, I decided the moment had come. I took a deep breath and addressed the room, keeping my voice even and composed. "I've been meaning to share something," I began, letting my gaze sweep over the gathered family and friends. Over the years, Verla has been very involved in how Cade and I live our lives, sometimes overstepping boundaries in ways that have affected both of us. I spoke slowly, calmly, without emotion clouding my words. I detailed small patterns I had observed, how certain gifts were monitored or redirected, how appearances were dictated, and even how decisions Cade made were subtly influenced. I framed it factually as observations rather than accusations, so it couldn't be dismissed as personal grievance. Verla's reaction was immediate. Her carefully maintained confidence faltered. Her lips pressed tightly and she blinked rapidly as she searched for a response. Every attempt to defend herself sounded strained, her words unconvincing in front of the attentive guests. The air shifted. The eyes that had once looked to her with admiration or neutrality now focused on the truth I had laid out, seeing the subtle control she had exercised in a new light. I continued, calmly emphasizing that our lives were ours to manage, that Cade and I appreciated input but needed space to make our own choices. My tone remained neutral, even friendly, leaving no room for her to claim I was bitter or resentful. The contrast between my composed delivery and her visible discomfort made the imbalance in authority undeniable. Guests whispered softly among themselves, some nodding, others exchanging glances of understanding. Sympathy naturally flowed toward me, not because I demanded it, but because the truth was evident and Verla's image had cracked. Cade's posture shifted, supportive yet relaxed, reinforcing what I had shared without confrontation. By the time I finished, Verla sat frozen, her control shattered, unable to salvage her public image. The revelation was complete. The room now recognized her manipulations for what they were. I felt a quiet sense of triumph, not from cruelty, but from finally exposing the reality with clarity and poise. The balance had shifted entirely, and for the first time, the weight of her authority rested in my favor. Verla's face drained of color as the last words left my lips. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, while the room grew quiet, eyes lingering on her in a mix of surprise and disbelief. The confident poise she usually carried had vanished, replaced by hesitation and an almost tangible discomfort. Her attempts to speak sounded hollow, each word faltering as the weight of exposure settled heavily on her. She opened her mouth several times, searching for an argument, but the calm, factual way I had presented everything left no room for a believable defense. The guests' expressions shifted subtly, some with raised eyebrows, some with sympathetic nods toward me, all quietly absorbing the full extent of her duplicity. The perfect matriarch she had carefully crafted for years now looked fragile, human, and undeniably flawed. Cade rose quietly, drawing her aside with a firm but measured tone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the firmness in his posture, the way his hand lightly rested on her arm as he spoke. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she seemed to understand that her usual tactics of control and intimidation would no longer work. I remained seated, serene and composed, smiling lightly as the tension lingered. There was no gloating in my demeanor, no vindictive gestures, just quiet strength. My satisfaction came from observing the natural consequences of her actions, from knowing that the truth had emerged without my having to attack verbally. The room seemed lighter, the oppressive tension lifted as Verla retreated inward, speechless and humbled. Guests returned to conversation, but the shift was palpable. The unspoken understanding that her dominance had ended lingered in the air. I felt a quiet pride, not in humiliating her personally, but in maintaining my dignity while exposing her manipulations. The evening had demonstrated that patience, composure and subtle strategy could achieve what confrontation alone never could. Verla had met the consequence of her behavior, and I had done so with grace, letting the truth speak louder than any words I might have used to fight back. Months had passed since that tense evening, and the air between Cade and me felt lighter, freer. We spent quiet weekends together, savoring small moments in our home, reflecting on how much had changed since Verla's presence had shifted from dominating to restrained. There was a subtle peace now, a rhythm unbroken by unnecessary criticism or hidden agendas. Verla had grown noticeably cautious. Whenever she visited, her comments were measured, her tone neutral, and the sharp edge she once wielded so confidently had dulled. I observed her restraint without gloating. It was clear she understood that her attempts at control no longer held weight, and that knowledge alone reinforced my sense of quiet triumph. I found myself smiling more easily, knowing that the balance had finally been restored without me compromising my composure. Every strategic move, every moment of patience had culminated in this new reality, one where I could navigate family gatherings without anxiety, where my voice and presence were respected naturally, not forced. Cade and I shared subtle acknowledgments of our journey. His glance of approval, the small moments of shared understanding, reminded me that support and partnership could be quiet but powerful forces. I cherished these interactions, recognizing how far we had come together, strengthened by the challenges we had weathered. Living through the aftermath, I realized that empowerment was not about overt revenge, but about asserting boundaries, observing carefully and acting thoughtfully. I had maintained my dignity, exposed manipulations, and let consequences unfold organically, proving that strategy and patience often surpass impulsive action. Looking forward, I felt a renewed confidence, not just in dealing with Verla but in life itself. I embraced the knowledge that challenges could be met with composure, and that betrayal, when handled wisely, could be transformed into clarity and personal growth. I cherished my marriage, my home, and the sense of calm that now pervaded both. Life had shifted from tension to harmony, and I understood fully that strength often lay in quiet, calculated choices. Verla's caution was a reminder of what had changed, but my empowerment and the respect Cade and I shared were the true rewards, permanent and well-earned. Do you think I handled Verla the right way, or should I have confronted her differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell.